introduce Dr. Paul MacCotter, who's a historian and genealogist, and he's going to give us a talk on Irish surnames. Thank you.
Good evening. It's always a pleasure to talk to my fellow members of the Cork Genealogical Society. I'm a medieval historian and a genealogist, for those of you who won't know me, and the talk I'm going to give tonight, was put together about 2 years ago because I was invited. At the time, Clan were doing lunchtime lectures in the National Library in Dublin. And they were basically getting people to go in and speak for 45 minutes to an hour at lunchtime, so I was asked to go up and speak on this subject. So it was sort of handy when I was asked a couple of days ago, would I be able to come in at short notice. I had a few things there, and this was probably the most interesting, I hope. The one thing I forgot to do was put in my contact details into when I was just looking at the slides again. I have a website, if anyone is interested at some stage, paulmaccotter.com, www.paulmaccotter.com, and there's an email address attached to that, paul@paulmaccotter.com. So that's the end of the advertisement, alright? Irish family names. Now, I'll be fiddling with glasses now as I go, because when you get to 50 you have to have reading glasses, and I can't do the bifocals, I never could. And I'm kind of here now and I'm not sure which one is going to suit better. I should have done this before I started, of course. Jesus, that's no. This one? You can always read the screen. Why is surname research relevant to genealogy? Alright. Theoretically, one's surname preserves the name of a direct male ancestor who may have lived up to 1200 years ago. Theoretically, the Americans, who were probably the pioneers in this area, coined the phrase a non-marital event to explain why some people had a surname but it didn't seem to belong to them genetically. In other words, there was a bit of something astray over the period. And it happened outside of the marital bed, so you can put your own on that. So again, I mean, Sullivan was very interesting. About half of the Sullivans have a group of connected DNA profiles, Y chromosome, and the other half approximately don't have any connection at all. And it looks like that's the way with a lot of surnames, that a large proportion of surnames belong to the wrong people. Alright. One theory, there's a number of theories about this. One theory is that in the Irish medieval clan society, servants and followers took on the name of the overlord and thus lost their own surnames. It was a protection thing at the time, a bit like the gangs today in a lot of the world, where you've got these gangs of young fellas and you have to be in the gang, so that you actually changed your surname and it told you what gang you were in. You took this, if you were kind of some kind of a servant or a foot soldier, or even a kind of a farmer or a farm labourer under, for instance, a branch of the O'Sullivans, you might take the name O'Sullivan yourself. This will give you certain protection, because you can't touch the O'Sullivans, they're tough. They're a tough crowd, they'll come back to you. So that was one theory about it. The bulk of Y-DNA studies do confirm one or two main groups per single surname. Conclusion: the majority of people do bear the correct ancestral surname. Since I've written that, there's been more research which kind of throws a bit of doubt on it, so it's not so certain as it was originally. The thing about DNA is that they keep changing the goalposts all the time. So, therefore, one surname is a valuable heirloom. It was Edward MacLysett. Those of you who might be familiar with Dr. MacLysett, he wrote a number of excellent books on Irish surnames of Ireland, more Irish families, blah blah blah, and he came up with this idea. To him, your most important family heirloom was your surname, because it told you stuff. You could go back 1,000 years with a surname. Once every other form of genealogy or family history was exhausted, you could go way back beyond with your surname. That was before the era of DNA. So maybe now there's two. Maybe there's the surname and the DNA as valuable heirlooms, your genetic markers and your surname. And the interesting thing fascinates me as a historian, and a historian who's been interested in surnames since I was a child. I actually bought MacLyseth's map. It was this fabulous map, big map of Ireland with all the different surnames, the Gaelic surnames in black, the Norman surnames in red, and I lost it years ago, and it's out of print for years. But you know, for me now, it was always surnames, history, and now it's DNA, surnames, history. So it's got doubly interesting now because they can connect very often. You know, they can cross-fertilize each other. All right. So when genealogy is complete and inevitably fails due to the absence of records, only two methods of continuing the family tree remain: surname research and, of course, we've mitochondrial DNA now, which really wasn't there when I was putting that thing together to the same extent. Forenames came before surnames. You know what I mean by a forename? We used to call them Christian names, but you can't say that anymore now. Political correctness, they're forenames, they're not Christian names, alright? The majority of surnames derive from the forename of an ancestor, usually male. And this is especially so with Irish surnames. Most Gaelic Irish surnames are actually based upon the forename of an ancestor. Most of the remaining forenames we use are biblical. We obviously, as people were Christian back 1600 years, it's inevitable. John, James, Michael, Daniel, Joseph, Mary Ann, Elizabeth, etc. And of course these all then have Gaelic versions as well. Myriad for Margaret, I don't know why I got Margaret. Sean, Seamus, Michal. Daniel stays Daniel in Irish basically. Joseph, Myra, Anya, Eilish, Siobhan, which is another one. The El there in Michael and Daniel, Mikael, Allah, El for God in Hebrew. So these are all names that have a meaning in Hebrew, okay? You remember, for instance, Elizabeth in the New Testament and so on and so forth. So these actual forenames, now the forenames come before the surnames, and the forenames are very old, you know, back to recorded history and beyond. We think that they were there. They're very ancient, often deriving from 2,000-year-old or more Indo-European naming patterns. Indo-European, the term relates to languages, you know. There's this big family tree of languages, like you've got the Celtic languages, you've got Irish, Welsh, Breton. You've got the Germanic languages, we're speaking one of them, English, German, Dutch, Scandinavian. And these are sort of like a family tree of languages that go right up to the top, and they're all under the umbrella of Indo-European languages. And there's actually a book out, only a few months ago on DNA, ancient DNA by a fellow called David Reich, R-E-I-C-H, and if you can get it on, if you're interested in this area, get the book, buy it on Amazon, on David Reich. I can't remember the name, R-E-I-C-H, I can't remember the title of the book now. But it's about that, and it ties in the spread of language with the spread of people and with the DNA, the whole thing coming together in a fascinating way. But for our purposes tonight, we just have these forenames that all sort of have the same pattern of being put together. You know, the Celts and the Germans had the same kind of style, so it's obviously a very, very old thing. And a lot of these forenames, a lot of them are double barreled, they have two terms connected into them, and I'll come back to that shortly. Originally most names meant something, as with the American Indians, Sitting Bull. You know, the name was thought to have a magical quality, and that somehow or other, if you call somebody, you know, brave warrior, he would become a brave warrior in life, that kind of idea. We kept some connection with the meaning of names for a long time, but the Americans came then, where's Pat? The Americans came and shagged the whole thing up because they lost, all the barriers went. So you get like you get a lady's name now, Kelly. Well, Kelly is Kelly, you know, Kelly is a surname, and the original Kellogg was a man. But the Americans have lost all, you know, they've lost completely the connection that there was some sense, or there was some meaning to names, you know. So you got this thing where a lot of the forenames are two elements stick together. Edmund, wealth protection, protector of strength or wealth. Edward, wealth guard. Eric, always king. Ericer. Richard is Richard, brave ruler. Louis comes from Ludwig, and then Ludwig, famous in battle. And of course all these are Germanic, but they're very common names that we have today, because these names, being Germanic, they were in English. And when we began speaking the English language, and when we were conquered territorially by England, we saw these names imported, where we started to use English forenames as well. You know. Of course, there are plenty of Irish forenames still in use, but you get the point. It was part of the colonisation of the English to actually introduce surnames that we wouldn't have been using until then. The Gaelic Irish certainly wouldn't have been using. But you had the Gaelic surnames have the same pattern. Echtigerne, horse lord of horses, lord of steeds. That's a Hearn. It's the surname of Hearn. Cartach, the Irish Cartach. You get Caradoc in Welsh. You get Coroticus in the Roman inscriptions in Gaul. It's all the same name, coming across from France. Loving or caring, and of course Cartach McCarthy. It's in the surname McCarthy. Murcud, sea warrior. Murphy. Conmara, again, hound of the sea. McNamara. Kellogg, strife, contention. Some of these are question mark, but it was MacLyset and the other fellow, Wolfe. He was another man who wrote a book on surnames in the early 20th century. And they basically suggested these meanings for the names. Kelloghan, little strife, which gives us the surname Callahan. So medieval Gaelic surnames had certain elements in common. In other words, there were certain meanings that were repeated a lot at the time. And if you look up there, see Moel, religious devotee of, it was Moel something, Moel Cahig, the devotee of Saint Cahach, Mother Downey, the devotee Moel Downey, the devotee of the Lord, and there were several others. Can't think of them right now. But what it actually referred to, Moel, it literally means baldy, and the monks shaved the top of their heads. It's called a tonsure. So people would adopt these names, or would perhaps be baptized with these names, and somehow or other it was a connection with some element of religion, so they were protected. It was like a spiritual thing. Like when we were young, our mothers would put the scapula on our necks. Well, back in Gaelic Ireland 1,000 years ago, people's forenames had the element of a saint's name built into them, so that there was a connection with the saint. Gula, and actually the other one, the most common, Moel today, and it's not even noticed, is Malcolm. You know, it's a Scottish name that came down into England, and it's a very kind of an English, Anglo-American name. Malcolm, we wouldn't think of Malcolm as Irish, but it's originally Irish. Devotee of Columcille, St. Columba, you know. Gula, follower of, again, Gula kind of has the same function as Moel, but it has a different meaning. It means follower, basically. Megillah Gila Mochuda is Cartach of Lismore, the saint. Gil Christ, the devotee of Christ. The surname Gilese, E-E-C-E, Giola Ilse, same thing, but it's the Irish form. Christ is the Latin, and Ilse is the Irish for Christ. Gildowney, same as Maloney. Gilligan, and then Gil can become Kilbane, Kilbride. Can't be taking them sweets on stop. Kilbride, of course, Bridget, St. Bridget. Kilfeather, that's in Down, that's an order name. Peter, St. Peter. Gilfeather. Kilkenny, again St. Canis of Kilkenny and Atterbow, Killilly and so on. And then you've got Con, the hound, because the Irish were big into dogs and the wolfhounds. You know, it was the aristocrat would have his pack of wolfhounds and go hunting. Connor, Concannon, MacNulty is MacCotter, the hound of Ulster. Conroy, the hound of the king. And then other surname originators were merely nicknames. Sullivan is described there towards the second half of that screen. His actual name was Uchid, and Suldawan wasn't, it was a nickname. And it has two possible meanings. It either meant Hawkeye, as in Mash. Very good, you're awake. Or it meant of the bright eye, yeah, or of the black eye. So there's a couple of meanings, but you get the idea. A lot of people were actually, the name they were given was a name that was given as a nickname, and they lost their original name. The O'Crowleys, Crualeich, the hard warrior, again, the real name was Diarmid in the genealogies, and they're unusual because they come down into County Cork in the 1200s from Roscommon. They were connected to the O'Connors up there. They weren't local stock at all, and became a big name in West Cork, where they're a big name. Okay, so that's how you put together Irish surnames. Gaelic Irish surnames. Again, these are ancestral. The surname is the forname of the male ancestor. There's two main categories. In other words, you get a prefix, either O or Mac is prefixed to the name in Irish. MacCarthy, O'Connor. You get very few exceptions. O means grandson of, and Mac means the son of. The technical term for O is a patronym, the name of the grandfather, just as the technical term for Mac, the son of, is a patronym, literally name of the father, name of the grandfather. By Mac and O you'll always know, true Irishmen they say, a bit of poetry here. But if they lack both O and Mac, no Irishmen are they. So this will make what you want of that. The Irish were probably the first to use surnames. They were the first to use surnames, introduced between 900 to 1100 AD. The original is O, is the original, the grandson of, but it actually meant the actual grandson, and you can find it back for hundreds of years before 900, but it wasn't a surname, it just referred to the actual grandfather. And then by about the 950s, it stops changing with each generation, and there's like a freeze. Something strange happens. If I'm the grandson of Sean, my son then will be the grandson of Paul. But when my son kind of became an adult, he didn't take the grandson of. He took his great grandfather's name, not his grandfather's name. And it became a surname, so it didn't change anymore. It was originally something that changed every generation and then froze at some stage between 900 to 1100, and never changed again. You know. There was a fashion, Mek, the son of, which was a variation on Ua. But this eventually, the Mek is dropped and this becomes Mac. So this is where we get our Mac as well. It isn't originally Mac, it was Mek. Now, you can surnames 1000 AD maybe, but our genealogies go back hundreds of years before that. So we have pedigrees and family trees going back to the 5th century and earlier. We're almost unique in Ireland in having this. No other country has anything like this, really. The unfortunate thing is that when the English came in and Cromwell and so on and dispossessed people, people were struggling to live, and keeping these wonderful genealogies went out the door and were forgotten. So for a lot of us, we love to get back to our ancestors who were living, in the 1600s. Can't do it. It's a pity. But some people are lucky they can, but most people can't. In this, surnames can be linked with older political units or kingdoms. It does take in the ancestral line back to perhaps the 5th century. I actually had a friend who I've come across two people whom we could actually do this with, taken back to the classical genealogies. Ordinary people, working class man, a carpenter. It's a long story. I think I'll mention it further on. So some people can actually get back to the classical written Gaelic genealogies. Most of us, the only way back we have to them is the surnames, the study of the surname. So you got these tribal groups. If you go back before surnames, the country was divided into, you can call them tribes, political units, whatever. They tend to be the ancestors of the modern counties. A lot of counties are based on these old 1,000-year-old units. The Dalgashian County Clare, there's the surnames you see associated with them. O'Brien, he was Brian Baruch, the King of Ireland. He dies in 1014. His father was Kennedy, you know. Hearn McNamara. McNamara again is a cousin of Brian Baruch. O'D, and then More. We come down to the owner of Cashel, South Tipperary originally. Later they moved down into Cork. McCarthy, McAuliffe, O'Callaghan, O'Hagerty. You know, McCarthy's, the Kings of Desmond. McAuliffe's were an early branch of the McCarthy's. Castle McAuliffe up in Mill Street. Cullen up there. The O'Callaghans are basically of the same stock again as the McCarthy's, as are the Hagertys. There's two Hagertys in Ireland. There are Hagertys in Ulster that have nothing to do with the Hagertys down here. The Dacian, Waterford, it was the Whelans, the Bricks, the Flanagans, the Foleys and the O'Neills. Everybody who's called O'Neill in Ireland thinks they're descended from the fellow that came down 1600, the Earl of Tyrone, Hugh O'Neill, and they have been O'Neills in mid-Waterford since the 12th century. And nothing to do whatsoever with the crowd up in the north. Nobody contradicted me there, that's fair enough. So Ronnie Nail, Kelly, Kindellan, McLaughlin, which is McLaughlin. We're not familiar with these names really. The Midlands is strange territory to us. The Ebruin and Connacht, the O'Connors, McDermott's, Duffys, Flynns, not the Cork Flynns are different. Flanagans and Crowleys. The Heachruch, again Connacht, the O'Dowd, Hain, Shaughnessy. We hear these names now and then, but they're not really local names down here. The Kinsella in Wexford, the Kavanaghs, the Kinsellas, the Murphys. But you get Murphys, there's actually 4 different branches of the Murphys, and they're not connected whatsoever to each other. You have Murphys in the Lee Valley, in Cork as well. And so on and so forth. Just look at the Northern Nail there, the O'Neills, Kanes, O'Donnells, Dohertys, Gallaghers, Hagans, Hagertys, McLaughlins. There was a paper published a few years ago by Bradley, the Trinity geneticist who's into this area, and he basically said that people bearing these surnames have a common DNA signature back to an ancestor who lived around the 5th century AD, and Bradley said he must have been Niall of the 9 Hostages, who is in fact the genealogical, the written ancestor to all those surnames, or to the men who started those surnames, you know. So look, that's just the rest. Many Irish surnames have no known early origin, yet the majority of Irish surnames can be traced back at least as far as the 16th century, and often much further. We know the origins of a lot of Irish surnames, but we don't know the origins of others, because the genealogies haven't survived for everybody. You know, again, there's only a selection of the genealogies that have survived because of one of the things the English did when in particularly under Elizabeth in Munster and also under Cromwell, is that when they took an Irish castle, an Irish fortress, the stronghold of an Irish lord, they burned all the paper they could get their hands on: deeds, leases, genealogies, poetry collections, and there are references to many famous Irish books. There are references in the 1600s and 1700s to such and such a book. The O'Mahony's had a book in West Cork, you know, the O'Mahony Fionn. And these have not survived. So we know there was all this wonderful literature there that was. And they also unroofed the churches, the English, under Elizabeth. They took the roofs off the churches because people would put their goods and people would put their documents, the ordinary people, in the church for safekeeping, the parish church. The English came along, they unroofed all the parish churches and burnt everything inside. Nice people, the English. How many English people are we here? Nobody put their hand up. Good. Of course, the English of today have nothing to do with all of that, but historically, there was a lot of bad stuff went on, particularly in this area, in fact. So you then get the modern explosion in clan history and clan societies, even though in many cases the online history isn't the best. So then the question comes up, how were names chosen? How did particular names become surnames? And a lot of them, your man was just so famous that his descendants were delighted and they were very happy to hold on to the name because the ancestor had been so powerful. An obvious one there is Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland, probably the first, to develop the High Kingship. He was the most powerful of the first High Kings. That's not quite coming out right now, but he was very, very powerful king, very special ruler, did a lot, is well remembered, He's killed in Clontarf in 1014, Callahan of Cashel. Callahan was a High King with opposition. Callahan, who's the ancestor to the MacCarthys and the O'Callaghan's, hence Callahan coming in there. He was killed in 956. He was basically, if you drew a line from Dublin to Galway, he ruled everything south of that line. Okay. O'Rourke, he was killed in 898, the ancestor to the O'Rourkes. Niall Glundove, Black Knee, he was killed at a battle of East Clare in 919. He's the ancestor to the O'Neills, obviously. Phelan, his death is recorded in 966, that's Phelan in West Waterford. Donovan, if you will, the modern form, he's killed in 980. The O'Brien propaganda made him a lackey of the Vikings of Limerick and they completely blacked his name. You had propaganda back then too, with Donald Trump-like people going around denying it and making fake news. And this guy is actually in the literature that the O'Briens sponsored, and of course the O'Briens had won the battle, and these Donovans are actually in Limerick, in East Limerick, so they're just facing the O'Briens, and the O'Briens damned them to hell basically, and what they wrote about them. The O'Donovans were eventually forced out. Most of them moved into West Cork, but they're actually fine. They were a fine clan and they were badly treated, I think, historically. Carter, who gives his name to the MacCarthys, he's burned to death in his house in Cashel in 1045 he was fighting with the O'Briens as well. Okay. Some surnames were probably adopted casually due to fashion. Everybody's doing this. Everybody's getting a surname. We must get one too. All right, our grandfather will do fine, So, and you get this thing where in the genealogies, the ancestor who gives his name to the surname was kind of anonymous. Some of them weren't anonymous, as I've just shown, but others were. And if you look there at number 2, is a list of the anonymous ones that we know very little about. Coim, Keefe, the O'Keefes. We know something about his father, we know something about his son, we know absolutely nothing about him, except that he gives his name to the surname. Kellogg, he's anonymous, that's Kelly. Flaherty, Galway, he's anonymous. Sullivan isn't actually as anonymous as to justify really being put in there, nor is Crulair. McMahon that's McMahon in County Clare there. And again, the other thing, just to mention it in passing, some surnames have multiple origins, and sometimes you get the clan societies are not really getting that, and they're lumping them all in. Like there's 6 O'Flanagan, and none of them, the Flanagans, none of them have any connection with each other, and they're scattered around the country. The Murphys are in Wexford, the Murphys are in the Mac Murphys are up in Armagh. There are Murphys in Connacht, and there are Murphys in the Lee Valley, the Barry Murphys and the others. Ballymurphy out there, Knockavilla, looking down onto Dandon.
Sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
Brian Boru, where did the Boru come from?
Cattle tribute, Boruba. Brian of the cattle tributes. There wasn't really an awful lot of money around at the time, so cattle were the currency, partly anyway, and he was rich in cattle because he had been the most powerful man, so he got all the cattle tributes. Okay, so that's that lot. There are 5 types of Irish surname: descriptive, describing the physical characteristics of the ancestor, and I'll give examples in the next slide. Occupational, based on the occupation. Cognomenic, based on a nickname given to the ancestor. Toponymical, based on the place the ancestor came from. and ancestral based on the forename. And most of the Irish surnames are, of course, ancestral. They're actually called after the actual forename of the ancestor. Some nicknames represent nationality. Walsh is the fourth commonest surname in Ireland. My mother was Walsh. Walsh was a generic name given to an awful lot of the farmers and the lower elements among the Anglo-Norman invasion, because a lot of the Normans who came into Ireland had already been settled in South Wales. They were well connected in with the ethnic Welsh around them. So when they came to Ireland and conquered Ireland, they brought a lot of their Welsh servants and their Welsh farmers with them. And these were simply known as Le Wallace. Wallace here tonight. It is actually the surname Welsh. It's not. Wallace is unconnected. It means exactly the same thing with Scottish. Okay, Le Wallace. Branagh. Welsh. English, so you find a lot of English in Tipperary, particularly a couple of hurlers, famous hurlers, whatever. Lombard's town up there near Mallow. It actually is the medieval word for an Italian. Lombardy, the district of Lombardy. It originally meant a banker. It was kind of a nickname. Anyway, Fleming. Flanders is the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. French, surname French is key. Brett, surname Brett, is Breton, Brittany. And the surname Ireland. You remember that soccer player who refused to play for Ireland? Stephen. Yeah, or didn't it? Yes, Stephen Ireland. But his ancestors would have been Normans who came to Ireland, probably. And then when the Irish colony collapsed in chaos in the 13 and 1400s, a lot of the Normans, the lower Irish, went back to England. And when they went back to England, it's like in modern England today, every Irishman's Paddy. So when they went back to England, they were just known as from Ireland, or Irish. So you get all these, and then would have come back into Ireland in the 17th and 18th centuries. I know, over and back. But anyway, the surname is there, Ireland, okay? It's not that common. Ancestral names are associated with both Gaelic and Anglo-Norman surnames. The Anglo-Norman ones there's a sample of them. It's actually an English, ethnic English surname. Nicholson, the son of Nicholas. Anderson and Henderson, they're both Scandinavian from the northeast of England. Richardson, Rogers, and then Fitzgerald and Fitzgibbon. Fitz comes from the French word for son of, and it's not confined to Ireland. We tend to think it's only an Irish name, but it's not. Fitzharris and various other names in England have the Fitz as well. Anglo-Norman surnames arrive in Ireland in the period 1170 to 1300. British surnames in the period 1550 onwards. Viking surnames are still earlier, but there are very few, and my surname is a Viking surname, MacCotter. Cotter is a Viking surname. What was your man, the leader of the Labour Party there, a few years ago, before the present fella? What was his name? Which? The head of the Labour Party, he was in government, he was a Thomas.
Spring.
No.
Rubbish.
No.
I think you voted on Billy Band.
No, the Irish Labour Party. Gilmore. They were Waterford Vikings. That's another Viking. There's only about 6 Irish Viking surnames, which gives a lie to the myth that the Vikings came in and conquered, and that we have a Viking element in our makeup. We don't really, very little. Okay. Descriptive. So just very quickly to run down there. You might find some of this mildly amusing. The descriptive surname is White, Russell is red-haired, Brown, Black, Hoare. There's actually I give them lectures now and then in Kerry, and out in the Dingle Peninsula there were 2 Knights' Fees. There were 2 powerful families next to each other. One was Hussey and one was Hoare. So I talk about the Hussies and the Hoares when I'm talking about Kerry. But the Hoare, actually, think of a hoarfrost. It means white hair. Think of Eddie there. Oh, nice white hair, Grace, from Gross, the French Gross, fat. Short, Pat Short, the comedian. Brendan Grace, yeah. What was a Fletcher? Arrowmaker, yeah, that's it, Arrowmaker. Webb, Weaver, yeah. Carpenter, Smith, Fuller. Fuller's had an interesting job. Fullers went around collecting all the urine. And they for the tanning industries. And they filled this vat with urine. They put in the leather, the skins, the animal hides, and they danced up and down on the hides. And they would actually pay for urine. So that's all gone now, unfortunately. Archer, baker, brewer, marshal. And then you get to the nickname type, savage. There's a lot of savages in East Cork, you know. My first ever talk, Tim Kelligan, God rest his soul, when I was starting out and I hadn't a clue, he invited me down to talk to the Great Island Historical Association. And I was terrified. And I just had a prepared text, and I sat there a moment or reading the prepared text. There are a lot of savages around Clyne, and the whole room erupted. I meant there were some people of the surname savage around Clyne, you know. But I entertained them for the night anyway. But I got over it, my first ever, 1990. That's a while back. So you have savages, woodsmen, rustic, culture. It's from the French, and it means dweller in the woods, man of the woods, you know. Dollard, you might remember Jojo Dollard there.
Yeah.
It's a common name. Well, that actually means a fool, a dullard. Busher is a butcher. There are cots in East Cork and in the city. That's very rude. Very, very rude. And I can't really give you the modern version of it. It starts with a D. That's all you're getting. But it was they didn't have any, you know, there was no rules, there was no decorum in those days, you know. They were very blunt and straight. And there was no bad language, there was no curses, everything was okay, you know. So that's why
people love giving somebody a nickname, don't
they do, and that's still it's kind of dying out a bit, but it's still all of it's still there. But everybody back then, you know, piglet, and of course the thing about cod is just think of the cod piece in this sort of arm. Right, yeah, we move on. Now, persons, piglet, lawless was the lawless person. Magner, we have Magners in Cork. Castle Magner. Mangonel, it was a type of fortification, a type of a tower in a castle built into the wall. Bowler, that's really more a Kerry name. And then the toponymical ones, and again, as I said, most of the Normans that came into South Munster came from Wales. Cogan is a suburb of Cardiff. Roach is a place in South Wales. Barry is an island off the coast of Wales. Kenfig is a village in South Wales. Kenfig, Kenfig. Prendergast were Flemings, and there is a place called Prendergast out by Fishguard, Stackpool and Condon. Okay, and then you get places in England: Hodnet in Shropshire, Kent, the county, Stanton, Birmingham, Burke. The Burkes were the Burg. That's actually a place in Norfolk in eastern England, and they were probably Bretons. And Tobin comes from the French, from the place in Normandy, Saint-Aubin, the Latin fella in where was he? He was stoned to death. Come to me. Okay, de Courcy, Nugent, the place in Normandy. Courcy is a place in Normandy. Evreux is a place in Normandy. Devereux. They used to. It's a Wexford name more than anywhere else, and the old people in Wexford used to call it Devereux, as it was spelled, but that's gone today and they become Devereux now. Prendeville, a Kerry name again, place in Normandy. Power comes from Le Poitiers, the district in eastern France. Okay. And you get a small number of Irish surnames that are the same. The surname Mead, which is a Cork surname. The ancestor obviously came from County Mead, Galway, and we have that politician.
Sorry, Paul. Would you include under the toponymical names, would you include the ones like that you mentioned earlier, like Welsh and Ireland and other ones as well, or were you putting them into some order?
Well, what they denote an ethnicity rather than a location.
Right, okay.
If you get me, yeah.
Yes.
So their toponyms, their place, they come from countries.
Yes.
No, you know what I mean, don't you? There is.
Yeah.
They indicate nationality, whereas these other names are an actual physical
A
place.
specific place.
Yeah, specific place. Yes.
What?
Yeah.
Did you ever hear of Beckler?
Say again, Declan.
Beckler.
No.
No.
Trust you to come up with a question like that.
Traced back to Switzerland.
I haven't a
Okay.
There's too many, you know. And I'll be asked another couple of questions after maybe, and if I get 1 out of 3, I do well. There's several thousand Irish surnames.
Is it possible that some of the names, the place might have been called after the people living there? Barry now, for instance. Rather than it being called after the name Barry, Barry was called after them.
In each case, the construction, like Barry, the name Barry was the name of the island before the Barrys ever arrived there. So that shows that went down. You know, and most of the others, most of the others will be the same. And like the norm, in any case, where you see the de as in Devro or de cursive means from. So it's even built into the name from wherever. Alright. I don't mind pausing for questions after each slide. We'll be here all night, but I don't mind. No, we won't actually. It's a short presentation, this one. We're about halfway through or more. Why are some surnames more common than others? You have the principle of ramification by powerful lineages, and talk about that in a while. And then you have lesser septs acquiring service roles with the great lineages. A clan might work for a powerful lord. The whole clan might actually be followers, you know. Powerful medieval chieftains had several wives in succession, usually young. Divorce was normal under the Brehon laws. Wife could divorce, and that was fine. Husband could divorce. May have several mistresses as well, and probably impregnate some of the servants also as they were at it. The Lord would have a string of wives, not all at once. Would marry, would divorce. Would marry, would divorce. And as he was getting older, the wives were all still 18 and 19. So he's getting on, he's in his 50s, 60s, 70s. He keeps trading in for a newer model every so often. You know? And this was, but the women did too. You know, one of the, what was she? One of the, in the 13th century, I can't remember who she was. No, she was an aristocratic woman, but she was known as she was known as the harbour of the three enemies, because each one of her 3 husbands had been enemies to the others. We'll move on. So you then have the custom of the naming of children, which is where children are born of casual relationships and afterwards affiliated by the sworn declaration of their mothers, usually when near death. Woman is on her deathbed, says, my son, we'll actually leave that away and I'll come back to it because I think it's explained in the next slide because it's very interesting. Illegitimacy is unknown under the Brehon laws. All sons have an equal claim to succeed the father as chief. This results in chieftains having many sons, portions of which have to be found for each. This is the explanation above of ramification, up on the top of the page. Hence the pressure for the clan to expand and acquire territory from neighbouring less powerful clans or from unrelated clans who hold territory within the lordship. So you had this business, and the classic cases from Fermanagh. The Maguires become kings of County Fermanagh as it later became around 1220s, 1230s, and they actually possessed the chieftain's portion. They owned about 12% of the land of the county. You come down to the 1580s and 1590s, and about 95% of Fermanagh is owned by different branches of the Maguires. So this was happening all the time. They were pushing out people further down, you know, and making land for the chieftain would set his own sons up, and then the next one of those sons became chieftain and would have to set his sons up. So he'd be taking land of his cousins for his sons, etc., etc. So that's where you got a lot of the warfare and stuff like that as well. Example 1, Richard Burke, the Earl of Clanrickard. He died in 1582. He had 6 wives. Again, one after the other, not all at once. They say it is a great tonic for all sorts of problems. Example 2, Con Bacach O'Neill. Now, this is the this is the bit about what I was talking about the last slide. Con Bacach is a cripple. Con the cripple, he was the Earl of Tyrone. He died in 1558. Yet the fact that he was a cripple didn't stop him from. He admitted to siring over 2 dozen sons by various women. Now, one of the sons This guy Matthew Kelly was the blacksmith's son from Dundalk, and the mother is dying. Mrs. Kelly is on and says to the assembled crowd, "He's not my husband's son. He's the great Earl O'Neill's son." So a messenger is sent to O'Neill, and will O'Neill say, "Oh, this woman is calling me"? He won't. It looked so good, you know. The more sons you had, it spoke of your virility, your power. So no powerful lord was going to refuse a named son, even if he probably knew full well. But it would appear that that Kelly's mother had had a one-night stand with O'Neill years earlier in Dundalk in the pub, because the O'Neills, of course, are just up in Armagh. They're quite near Dundalk. It's not that far, and. Apparently there was a one-night stand, and she remembered this, and O'Neill agreed, and this Matthew was brought up to Tullahogue, to the O'Neill Castle there in Dungannon in Tyrone, and counted among the many sons, and he was the most ambitious of the lot, and he eventually succeeds his father. He was renamed for Dorcha, black man, dark man. Okay, and he in turn, this Matthew, was the son to Hugh O'Neill, the great Earl of Tyrone, the flight of the Earls and all of that. And you know, where do you go then with the DNA for the O'Neills? Because it could be Kelly DNA, and those Kellys are not the Kellys in Connacht. Those Kellys are the Kellys of Louth, or different Kellys. Okay, so that's it. We're nearly there now. So this is for your delectation. This is Dermot O'Murrough, the late Dermot O'Murrough's book, Family Names of County Cork. That's on the flyleaf of the book, or the inside cover. And he doesn't. It's a very good book if you are interested, and your surname is among the 50 commonest surnames in County Cork, because that's what Dermot did. He went in. He looked at the Matheson's list of surnames from the census of 1891, and he basically wrote a little chapter on each of the 50 surnames in County Cork. He's not always right, and in fact, if you see his second edition, there's a 3-page insert at the back that I wrote, and he kindly published it because I was correcting his first. Shouldn't be boasting. He's dead now, God knows. He was a fine historian, but the book doesn't have the sources, and he had the sources. You could ring him up and he'd tell you where he got it. I don't know whatever happened to that paperwork. But if you just look at, you can't see the colours there, but the North and East Cork, the names were all Norman names. Fitzgeralds, the Barrys, the Condons, the Fitzgibbons up there. And when you go further over, then you get into the various McCarthy branches up in Duhallow. The McCarthy's divided into 4 branches. One of them were in Duhallow. One of them were down in the Lee Valley, the Lords of Muskerry. These were the people in Blarney Castle, and they were in Macroom Castle. The McCarthys up there were in Cantor Castle, and the third McCarthy group then were the McCarthys who ruled most of West Cork, from castles in Kilbrittain. Yeah, and the final McCarthys were the McCarthys of Killarney, the Lords of. They were on Loch Lean there. Castle Loch, the hotel is there. The Castle Hotel, the Lake Hotel in Killarney. If you ever went and stayed there, you walk out, and there's the old castle on the rock. That was the McCarthy Castle there. So the McCarthys would have been probably the most powerful clan in Cork. They were driven down by the O'Briens in the early 1100s, and then they were driven out. They were actually the rulers of Cork City before the Normans came. Shandoon was their fortress, the old fort, and they used to hang people outside the gate of Shandoon. That was justice at the time. It was part of just it was part of lordship, what was involved in lordship. And you get various other surnames then that you can, the Barretts are screaming for a history to be written. They're most interesting people. They became more Irish. They were Normans, the name is French, but they became more Irish than the Irish themselves. And they slaughtered each other, and they slaughtered the McCarthys, and they slaughtered everybody. They were very Irish, The McSweeneys were Gallowglass. They originally came from. Well, that branch that came into Cork. They were out in Clonduff and out around Macroom, and they come down from Donegal, but the crowd in Donegal came from Scotland, and the Scottish McSweeneys are actually McQueen, Quee, and they're the same name, same ancestor. They were Gallaglass, they were professional soldiers basically. Some names, O'Herlihy, we know nothing about before the 1400s. They're a mystery, except that they were the family associated with the Church of Ballyvorney. The O'Learys, they're in Ivy in Shigila out there. They probably came from the coast and were driven inland by the Normans. I was talking about the O'Donovans a while ago, Castle Donovan, Lepp and Glandore, they're down there. The O'Mahanys are utterly fascinating people again. The Mizzen Peninsula, unfortunately, one of the things we've done is we've even surrendered our place names. The Mizzen Peninsula was originally Ivacha, and it's called after the tribal name of the O'Mahanys. But we've now called it Mizzen after the headland there at the end. That's what the sailors call it. And the O'Dailys, the poets, are out on Wintervara, Sheep's Head. So that peninsula is called after a piece of offal. And the lovely name Wintervara, it's 1600 years old, is half forgotten about. So that's and the O'Mahanys are also up around Bandon. And up in the hill, there's an O'Mahony clan society, a very interesting group of people. They've kept studies of the surname going since the 1950s. They have an annual event there, and I attended it this year. It was up on, I spoke at it. It was up on the ancient Ringfort complex north of Bandon, there, Garans, which is interesting because that was. They excavated Garans and they found material going back to the 5th and 6th centuries. So, and it was, the ancestors of the O'Mahanys were there then. So we're one of the things we have, we have this thing in Ireland that most of the surnames, almost to the present day, remain located in the places where their ancestors was. There was very little, there was no industrial revolution in Ireland like there was in England in the 1700s and 1800s, which people moved from the place they'd lived in for generations to get work. We didn't have that, so there's very little movement in Ireland. Most of the MacCartys are still in Cork and Kerry, most of the Dohertys are up in Donegal, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the main Irish families, and then you have the Normans, the Condons, the Fitzgibbons, the Fitzgeralds, or we could be here for the night, we won't, we're nearly finished now, but they're utterly fascinating people again. And the Barrys, with various territories, Carricktool, Castlelyons, and up Buttervent. Yeah, Buttervent and up there. The Roaches and the Condons hated each other's guts. It was like, what that thing in Scotland with was it the McGregors and the Campbells or something? Two slaughtered each other, Glencoe and all that. You had that in County Cork, the Roaches and the Condons. They were actually cousins. The lordship passed to a daughter. The Condons were originally the lords of the whole area up there. The daughter inherited the lordship, and she married a Roach, he came in to the lordship, and all her male relatives didn't like this one bit, so they fought. And they're the Condons, and the Roaches are on that side, and this went on for about 200 to 300 years. And they were still slaughtering each other in the 1580s, and they had started slaughtering each other in the late 1200s.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
The O'Neills in West Cork were the company.
The O'Neills in West Cork?
Yes.
I haven't a clue. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I don't. There's movement that's after the period of the clans. There's movement that's after the 17th century. There's a whole nest of Cotters out in Inchiquila, and all the Cotter history is in East Cork. And yet there's quite a large grouping in a small area. How did they get there? Presumably, there was a couple of them went out, took leases on lands, and were very fertile men, and maybe, I don't know how they did it, but they multiplied. One way or the other.
And it was Shields.
Shields?
Sheely, which is a branch of Shields.
No. How do you spell that?
Well, it can be S-H-E-A-L-Y, S-H-E-I-L-Y.
That looks like a nickname.
It's not, it's apparently for Ballypaddock, which is Ballypaddock or something.
Yeah.
It was a really old Irish name.
Okay. Sorry.
Who
No.
wrote the book again?
Diarmuid Marcoux.
Do you know?
Yeah, it is Murchadha. He spells it
Sorry, it's
traditional way. Go on.
Well, that map is essentially, I suppose, really people that own land,
It
rather
is.
than
Oh, it is.
people.
It is.
There was the Barrymores were the main controller of that area, and the Shells down south. So
They were. And they, some of their offshoots, they had offshoots under them of their own stock as well. But
right.
they would have had a lot of people who had no connection to them living
Yeah.
within the.
Do you know anything about the Lucy's?
Yeah, I mean they're Mill Street way, and they're there from the 1570s, 1580s, Ballyvourney, Mill Street. But there's a lot of ours. I mentioned a while ago that there are just some surnames that we can get them back to the 1500s, and that's it. And we had no idea where they came from before that. And Lucy's are one of those, I'm afraid. Again, that's where DNA might come in, you see, and you might find that some of the Lucy's are connected to some of the other local surnames. So then you begin to get. That has actually worked in a couple of incidents recently where we've been able to identify and link surnames. Brazel, Shinquin and Brazel and a couple of others have been linked to other surnames based on the fact that they have common DNA. So the hope there would be history finishes you in the 1500s with Lucy, but the DNA, if there was a Lucy DNA group now might be very interesting. So that's your next move now. Okay, anybody, any other questions? I'm more or less finished now, so any questions?
Nagel there. Nagels.
Nagel.
They're Nagel's crowd.
Yeah, no, Nagel's crowd. They were Normans. They came from South Wales. And they were up there until the bullet from the 1200s on. Okay.
And what do you make of the new surnames now, the double barrel ones?
I guess it's not. We weren't raised for that kind of thing.
No. But some people now are making combinations of the two names and naming their children with the combination name, which is going to make things a bit confusing. Interesting. So,
But there's a lot of other things that will make genealogy interesting.
yeah, like Polish names.
But it's the way, if people changing their names by deed poll.
Yeah, that sort of thing, yeah.
Or people who are the result of in vitro fertilization. Where's their ancestry? Untraceable.
Anybody else? Any other question? I'd like to thank Paul for. There was one thing I meant to say earlier also, and names here. O'Leary, and we have Pat O'Leary there, all the way from America, at our meeting tonight, so he's a member of the society. Paul did some work from 3 years ago, so we'd like to welcome him from America.
3,000 miles just for the meeting.